You are welcome here, regardless of your beliefs, your race, your age, or whom you love. We are proud of our status as a welcoming congregation, and we hope you will consider making this your spiritual home. Please turn off your cell phones, and remember that through the good work of Jake and David, our program is being live streamed today by YouTube. This means you can visit the channel and watch again at a later time. Our board president, Tricia, has a very important announcement to make.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to give you a quick update on the hiring of a new minister. I heard from her this morning. We don't have a signed contract in place yet, but she said she will sign it and get it back to us on Monday. And I feel comfortable now going ahead and announcing that her name is Shannon Gorez. She will be a half-time minister. She will come and give 20 sermons a year, and then she will have office hours for folks to come and visit with her every week. So we'll have somebody in the building that if you need to come to talk to somebody, she will be attending various meetings as well. So she's going to be very involved with us. She comes from the Surfy Universalist tradition. So if you're interested, you can look that up. It's SUFI Universalist. So very exciting, folks. She'll be starting August 1st. That's all I have.
Thank you. That's enough. Very good. And I think Eldon has an announcement to read.
The Otters family has decided to have a pop-up fundraiser this afternoon from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. at their home. To benefit UNICEF, there will be a variety of garden goods and crafts to choose from. Free will donations will be accepted. Please contact Jabel Odgers with any questions.
That's this afternoon. All right. Thank you. Next Sunday's program is going to be called On the Spectrum, Part 1, led by our own Blair Hall. So you don't want to miss that. The other announcements should be on the back of your program. And I think there's a LRE Council at noon today as well.
No, it's next week.
Pardon?
It's next week.
Next week. Okay, next week is LRE. And Dr. Robin Hanson will light the chalice for us.
I'm going to jump in here. I have just a little announcement also. We will have our first cups meeting today following service, so we can kind of get together and figure out just exactly how we want to kind of proceed with that. So if you are interested at all in cups, please stay after and we'll have a little discussion. It won't be long, but we want to get everybody's input, okay? For the chalice. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. You think I'm old enough to know what to do with the match? Well, maybe. There we go.
So you don't burn your fingers.
I can be rather direct, so.
And now the best part of the program, Aaron Forstein, our Director of Religious Exploration, has a story for all ages.
Testing. Good morning, children. If you would like to come up, you can come on up here and you can see the pictures a little better. So today's story for all, today's service is about spirituality in Kansas. And I was thinking about, what does spirituality mean to me? And I realized that my favorite thing to do is to go for like walks in the country, hiking in the mountains, by the ocean, taking long drives, and just putting out questions and listening, waiting for answers. And sometimes I get an answer, sometimes I don't get answers. And this story, the person is asking questions to the road. And it says what the road says back. So, our story for all ages today is What the Road Said by Cleo Wade. And this is how the story goes. Have you ever wanted to go in a different direction? Have you ever wondered if there was something more, something out there, something just different? I did too. Then one day I was walking my usual way home when out of nowhere, for no reason at all, almost as if it were magic, a road appeared. I could not believe my eyes, so I walked over to it and I said to the road, "Where do you lead?" The road said, "Be a leader and find out." "How do I start?" I asked. The road smiled and said, "You have already started." "Well, what happens when I get there?" "We have just begun," said the road. "Do not skip straight to the ending. Enjoy the beginning and the middle, too." "Which way do I go?" "That is your choice to make," said the road. "But what if I go the wrong way?" The road curved a little, almost as if it was giving me a hug, and said, "Do not worry. Sometimes we go the wrong way on our way to the right way." "What if I get scared?" "That is okay. You are brave," said the road. "But what does it mean to be brave?" I asked. The road guided me through a very gloomy forest. Even though I was frightened, I trusted the road, and as I took one step and then another step, after that, the road gently whispered, "Being brave is when you're afraid of doing something, but you do it anyway. Do not let what scares you keep you from continuing on your path." Thank you. "Will I always move forward?" "Not always," said the road. "Why not?" "Because sometimes you will stumble backwards, and sometimes you will stand still." "What if I fall?" "Everyone falls at some point," said the road, "but I will always be there when you land." "What if I get lost?" "There may be some days that feel long and dark," said the road, "but I promise that no matter what, I will give you the evening stars and morning sun to light your way." "What if I grow weary or get hurt?" "I will give you trees of all shapes and sizes to shelter you when you need to rest and heal," said the road. "What if I get lonely?" You are never alone, said the road. What if I change? Come with me, said the road. And as I moved forward, the road introduced me to a caterpillar and a family of seeds. We did not stay long. The road began taking me on a journey through the seasons. I watched summer turn to fall and fall turn to winter, and as spring was upon us, I realized we had gone in one big, beautiful circle. I looked down and I found I was standing in front of the caterpillar and the seeds once more. Only the caterpillar was no longer a caterpillar, and the seeds had turned to flowers of every color swaying in the sun. The road then raised me up and said, all things grow and change. That is the magic of being alive. You too will find your wings. You too will bloom. No living thing is meant to stay the same. What if I need help on my journey? Ask your fellow travelers along the way. What if they are mean to me? Lead them to kindness, said the road. How? By being kind. What if they want to fight? Lead them to peace, said the road. But how do I lead them to peace? By listening to their stories, telling them yours, and reminding them that you are all on this journey together. What if the world around us is filled with hate? Lead it to love. How? By sharing the power of your love with it, said the road. What if something unexpected happens? Keep going. What if there are mountains that feel too tall to climb? What if there are rivers that feel too wide to cross? What if I get my heart broken? What if giving up is easier? What if I feel stuck? Keep going, keep going, keep going, said the road. What if I can't do it? You can, said the road. How do you know? Isn't that pretty? Because you have come this far, said the road. I said to the road, where do you lead? And the road said, be a leader and find out. And now Artemis is going to help us with the RE lantern. Yes? Thank you.
I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Now is the time when we offer our gifts. If you're a guest or a visitor, please let the basket pass and let our program be our gift to you. If you are making a pledge payment, it's helpful to leave it in the little box in the vestibule to where to have it used for a while. And yes, we need joys and concerns. We have a closing song. Good. Any joys and concerns? Much gratitude to Lou Hoover for all her work in reorganizing our website. And that's practically a full-time job. She's on that almost every day, updating and posting and sending out information. I know. On a personal note, sure.
There will be no board meeting this week. We don't have anything additional to address, so we'll pick it up again in August.
On a personal note, I'm required to report that our great-grandson Weston, 1 year old, is now walking, and Lola, our 2.5-year-old great-granddaughter, is still walking and talking and talking. Please share your joys and concerns with the fellowship, whether they relate to the organization or your families, and please use the microphone or raise your hand if you need a hand mic. Please introduce yourself and speak directly into the microphone. Remember that we are being live streamed for perpetuity. All right.
For those of you that remember him, our youngest son, Michael, turned 40 last week. Many of you remember.
Oh, we're going to do a song now. Okay. I'm ready.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the something of compassion. Sail in the wind, rise in the sea. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you, Janine. About 25 years ago, Adele and I took a drive in the country after the Sunday program. We stopped at a small cemetery near Overbrook. It was tiny but well maintained. It had fresh graves with bright flowers indicating that it was still in use. The most notable feature of the Ridgway Cemetery was a large complex of upright stones in a distinctive configuration. Next slide, please. The withered stones were covered with lichen, which made it difficult to decipher the inscription. So we drove to Casey's nearby and bought shaving cream, something I have not done for a long time, a squeegee, and a roll of paper towels to help make out the script. Kansas is home to a number of unusual cemetery monuments, many of which have been well documented. Samuel Dinsmore's enigmatic Garden of Eden in Lucas is well known. Next slide, please. As is the Davis marble statuary in Hiawatha, near the first church where my father preached. My own interest in the messages left for posterity came from the Attica Cemetery in Harper County, where my grandfather is buried. His grave is just a stone's throw, sorry, bad metaphor, from that of Nathaniel Grigsby, next slide please, who left a stern warning about the perils of the Democratic Party. It reads as follows. Went to school with Lincoln's brother, to Aaron Grigsby, who married Abe Lincoln's older sister, Sarah. Visited the White House. Through this inscription, I wish to enter my dying protest against what is called the Democratic Party. I have watched it closely since the days of Jackson and know that all the misfortune of our nation has come to it through this so-called party. Therefore, beware this party of treason. Every cemetery tells us stories of its occupants, and each marker has features that are unique to the loved ones being remembered. Tombstones also demonstrate the regional trends that developed with a westward expansion, and they often reflect the values of the various faiths and communities that nourished its members. Ridgway Cemetery is no exception. It's located just east of 125th and Croco inside Osage County. And it was erected by Hiram K. Riley. So we began our study of the Riley family at the Osage County Historical Museum in Linden. We learned that the parents, Hiram H. Riley and his wife Elizabeth, operated a woolen mill in Bath, Virginia. The town was later renamed Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, after the abolitionist region of the state gained statehood in 1863, just after Kansas. When the mill was destroyed by fire, they moved to Kansas with their children, Helen, Martha, Mary Ann, John, and Hiram K. Riley. 1857 was the year that the Kansas Territory was opened up for immigration. Hiram Heberling, a neighbor in Bath, Virginia, joined the Riley family on their journey to the fledgling community of Ridgway, Kansas. Heberling was later elected to the Kansas legislature. The newcomers were active in the Twin Mounds Grange and the Overbrook Masonic Lodge. They served on the school board. Most of the family's members were buried near Hiram's imposing monument. They left few records beyond their own grave markers in Ridgway. Next slide. Hiram K. Riley, the youngest child, lived from 1839 to 1912. He erected his monument in 1910 at a cost of $800, 2 years before his own death. It provides a detailed description of his beliefs, consisting, next slide, of 8 standing stones, some towering more than 8 feet over his tomb, in what might be considered as a cross between a billboard, a miniature Stonehenge, and the pages of an open book describing his belief in harmonial philosophy. It consists of 4 large pillars in a quadrangle shape, supporting 3 horizontal panels. Each pillar is topped with a stone globe. The 4 smaller uprights each have 2 columns on each side, and the text delineates the various aspects of the development of civilization. Next slide, please. The most famous member of the Riley family was undoubtedly Lewis Lindsay Dyke, Hiram's nephew. The son of his sister Mary Ann was a newborn when they departed for Kansas. He claimed to have been nursed by Native Americans due to his mother's illness during the journey. The dashing Kansan, for whom KU's Dyke Museum of Natural History is named, remains one of the most popular tourist sites in Kansas. Dyke was a self-promoter extraordinaire. He was a renowned naturalist and explorer who was instrumental in early science of taxidermy. He brought back specimens of animals from his travels all over the globe, and he displayed them at the Dyke Museum. He developed the practice of exhibiting panoramic specimens in family groups, many of which are still on display. His most noteworthy achievement was leading the Kansas Pavilion to the 1893 Columbia Exposition in Chicago. He is best known for having preserved the remains of Comanche, the only surviving horse of Custer's 7th Cavalry from the Battle of Little Bighorn. Dyke lectured widely, and his magic lantern presentations of his adventures were popular in auditoriums and Chautauqua tents all around the state. In 1910, Governor Stubbs appointed him Fish and Game Warden for the state of Kansas. Months of research helped us to finally solve the mystery of the text. We learned that it came from the magic staff An autobiography of Andrew Jackson Davis. We found the complete text of Hiram Riley's Monuments was taken verbatim from Davis's book. And there are pages and pages of text written on these stones. It was published in 1857, the year the Riley family immigrated to the Sunflower State. Young Hiram was 19 at the time. We can imagine him reading Davis's harmonial philosophy on the journey west. Davis wrote, published, and lectured on the subject of spirit communication and relative obscurity. Next slide, please. And that should be, yes, thank you. The Poughkeepsie seer claimed to have received communication from Emanuel Swedenborg. Next slide, please. Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772, was a prolific polymath, scientist, inventor, theologian, mystic, and philosopher who wrote over 30 volumes and claimed to possess the ability to communicate with the dead. Next slide, please. John Fox was a blacksmith. His wife Margaret gave birth to their 6 children and helped to tend their peppermint fields. The youngest daughters, Kate and Margaret, were 12 and 14 when the tapping began. The family lived in the hamlet of Hydesville near Rochester, New York. Their shabby cabin was haunted by rumors of a peddler who was supposedly buried beneath the house. The loose shingles and clapboards of the old frame house rattled in the wind. The winter of 1848 was particularly brutal. Fierce winds shook the walls. Amidst one particularly blustery blizzard, the sisters claimed that they received coded messages from the murdered peddler. They demonstrated to their parents how they received yes-no answers with single or double taps. Word spread quickly throughout the village, and everyone wanted to witness and participate. Among their neighbors were Amy and Isaac Post, radical Hicksite Quakers, abolitionists, and devout spiritualists. Next slide, please. Crowds began to descend on the cabin, and the girls expanded their communication beyond yes or no by counting the number of taps to correspond to the letters of the alphabet. 1 for A, 2 for B, 3 for C, etc. To speed up the process of spelling out letters by knocks, they acquired a Boston planchette. It later evolved to the Ouija board, a relic that has survived to our century. Western New York spawned so many religious revivals that the region became known as the Burned-Over District. Mary Baker Eddy launched Christian Science from the Genesee Valley. Millennialism grew out of this space. Mormonism originated in nearby Palmyra, 10 miles east of Rochester. Isaac Bullard preached free love and communism. John Humphrey Noyes established the utopian Oneida community to promote complex marriage as sort of holy free love. Mother Ann Lee of the Shakers, on the other hand, preached celibacy as the ability to become perfect. William Miller, a preacher from Vermont, came to the area and predicted that the Lord would return in 1843 or 84. His followers became the Seventh-day Adventists. Next slide, please. The 1825 completion of the Erie Canal connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean and brought all kinds of travelers to upstate New York, seeking their fortunes or spiritual revival. Frederick Douglass began publishing the North Star, his abolitionist newspaper, in Rochester, and numerous sites of the Underground Railroad were in the vicinity. The 1848 expansion of the telegraph was seen as evidence that thoughts could be transmitted through the air. The Fox sisters were said to practice spirit telegraphy. Other exciting developments throughout the world were Michael Faraday's experiments in electromagnetism. More advanced telescopes revealed the greater details of the planet Neptune. Early stages of photography in the form of the daguerreotype became widely used. The nation was open to new ideas, and the Fox sisters took advantage of the circumstances. Next slide, please. Andrew Jackson Davis took the Erie Canal to Rochester for a visit, and he became convinced that the girls were indeed communicating with the spirits of those recently dead. He became known as John the Baptist to the Fox sisters. He invited them to his home in New York and gave them instructions on how to set up the table and lantern or candle where the seances would take place. Under the leadership of Andrew Jackson Davis, and he's no relation to the Davis monuments in Hiawatha, the girls were engaged to perform in public, New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. P.T. Barnum, another grand self-promoter, hosted spirit circles with the Fox sisters at his hotel in New York City, charging 75 cents for admission. Sometimes they spoke in trances as the crowds listened and watched in hushed silence. It can be compared to the Zoom meetings we endured during our recent pandemic. Are you there, David? You need to unmute, Adele. As the movement's popularity grew, their followers increased, and the majority of them were women. Feminism and spiritualism were bound together from their common origin. Death has always been closer to women than to men, so it's understandable that women would be drawn to the promise of communicating with their lost children. The Civil War left 650,000 men dead, leaving untold numbers of widows alone to raise their children, to manage their farms and businesses, and to care for those wounded in the war. Drowning, stillbirths, typhus, malaria, fire, yellow fever, and other diseases took their toll on nearly every family. Some of them claimed the ability for automatic writing, maybe a precursor to our chat GPT. William Butler Yeats was an advocate of this practice. Others were mesmerists, faith healers, and prophets. Trance mediums were often asked to speak at weddings and funerals. By the 1850s, it was reported that there were thousands of spiritualist mediums in every state. It was said that women did not choose the role of spirit medium, rather it chose them. Next slide, please. One of the most prominent public spiritualists was Victoria Woodhull, a leader in the suffragette movement. She spoke frequently at state and national conventions, and in 1871 she was elected president of the American Association of Spiritualists. She was a candidate for the U.S. presidency in 1872. She was introduced to Cornelius Vanderbilt, who wanted to communicate with his dead wife. His financial backing enabled Victoria and her sister Tennessee Claflin to make a fortune on Wall Street. Their firm was the first woman-owned brokerage on Wall Street. Her reputation was tainted by accusations of free love because she had announced that women should be free to love whomever they wished. Horace Greeley was a tireless champion of women's rights, suffragette, and abolition. He and his wife had lost 4 of their 5 children. So in their grief, they invited the sisters to spend several days at their farm outside Manhattan. Greeley published a strongly worded defense of the Fox girls in the New York Tribune. And of course, Greeley is the county seat, or Tribune rather, is a county. Greeley is the county seat of Tribune. At any rate, their public exhibitions were proving successful to the young Fox sisters, so they increasingly turned from the auditorium to the parlor. They were in high demand and were often called to serve as spirit mediums to the rich and powerful. When the world-famous singer Jenny Lind began her tour of the U.S. in 1850, she made a specific request to meet Kate Fox, so Greeley arranged the seance. President Lincoln's son Willie died at the age of 11 on February 20th, 1862, apparently of typhoid fever. And 12 years earlier, their son Eddie had died at the age of 3. The president's wife, Mary, was so deeply distraught that she turned to the rising trend of seances to provide comfort by communicating with their son. The president joined her on several occasions in the Red Room of the White House. The spiritual leader of some of those sessions was Charles Colchester, who happened to be a drinking buddy of John Wilkes Booth. William James, Harvard philosopher and psychologist, and brother to the novelist Henry James, became interested and proved to be a major force in the organization of the American Society for Psychical Research. And a very public battle of wits occurred between Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini over the validity of spiritualism. The Fox sisters were subject to endless criticism and speculation, especially by newspapermen who demanded proof of their veracity. Numerous challenges were made, and on several occasions, women retired in private chambers with the sisters so they could be disrobed and redressed to show that they concealed no device or mechanism that could account for the transmittal of their messages. National conventions were held yearly, often in Lilydale and Hopewell, New York. Speakers included Susan B. Anthony, who was born in Rochester, Warren Chase, a Wisconsin judge and legislator and gubernatorial candidate, was also a frequent speaker. Other topics were women's rights, abolition, and temperance. Considerable controversy arose over the extent to which the spiritualist cause should be promoted. Many felt that they should organize nationally, but others contended that an approach of that nature would be too much like the men's groups, which had not served them well. Spiritualism was the first religion in history in which women shared an equal role in the fellowship of the believers. Reverend Olympia Brown was the first woman to be ordained a minister by the Universalists in 1863. Spiritualism challenged the traditional view of Christianity. The love of a dead child replaced the love of Jesus as comfort to the faithful. Some adherents criticized the church for its failure to speak out against slavery. By now, spiritualism had rejected Calvinism as the legacy of Reverend Jonathan Edwards. But in general, the spiritualists did not reject organized religion. Most were comfortable attending regular church services on Sunday after participating in a seance the previous Saturday night. The Sunflower State was not immune from the wildfire of spiritualism that swept through the nation. Among the prominent Topeka spiritualists were Franklin L. Crane, the founding mayor of Topeka, his son George Crane, a printer and publisher, Mrs. Cyrus K. Holliday, wife of the railroad mogul, and George Nowning, the photographer. They hosted a number of state conventions in the capital city. Other spiritualists were Sockless Jerry Simpson, the famous populist presidential candidate. His secretary was J.C. Hubbard, Eric McHenry's ancestor. Henry Hyatt of Twin Mound, Kate Bender, the red-haired daughter of the Bloody Bender clan in Cherryvale. Interestingly enough, Carrie Nation's father sold his farm in Peculiar, Missouri, to the founders of a spiritualist colony. But eventually every storm runs out of rain. Just as the canals gave way to the railroads and the telegraph yielded to the telephone, beliefs in spiritual communication began to dwindle. In 1888, the Fox sisters finally renounced spiritualism, calling it, quote, humbug from beginning to end, end quote. This resulted in a furor of publicity in the press. Both young women died in disgrace a few years later amidst accusation of divorce, alcoholism, and child neglect. But the movement they launched continued. The National Spiritualist Association formed in 1893, the year that Maggie died. So in conclusion, a historian is a bit like a spiritualist medium, one who attempts to give voice to the dead. The mid-19th century seemed as bifurcated as our current time. North and South, men and women, slave versus free, physical or spiritual. So the legacy remains. Topeka even has a street named after Victoria Woodhull. It's just east of Gage, facing the post office there. The 1960s and 70s saw a revival of New Age beliefs with A Course of Miracles and Seth Speaks. Next slide. Cemeteries changed from the traditional churchyard burial ground to park-like settings with benches, groves of shady trees, and perennial lilies. Our use of the term dying was replaced with passing on. And finally, one monument in Osage County that was undocumented for a century has been interpreted, correctly we hope. Hiram K. Riley's grave marker remains an imposing monument to harmonial philosophy, but one of the large upright columns has fallen. So it now lies in disarray. Andrew Jackson Davis's text still remains partially visible for all to see. But Adele and I constructed, next slide please, a miniature replica of the monument, complete with all the text, which is now on display at the Osage County Historical Museum in Linden. Thank you for your patience this morning. I brought with me my source materials on a chair back there, if anybody's interested in reviewing my bibliography, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And remember, if you want to speak from the microphone, speak clearly and directly into the mic and introduce yourself. And remember that we are being recorded live.
Nancy Heitzig. Walt, that was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Is there any way we can get copies of your presentation?
Yeah, I can send it to you.
That was just great. I'd love to have a copy of that. I was taking notes, but I'm not that fast anymore. Thank you.
Lana Balka. I too find it really fascinating to visit cemeteries. And this week I had a real live experience with Ancestry. On Friday night, extended family, meaning 12 people, were coming through Topeka. These are my Mormon relatives from Utah. And they're very much into genealogy, and they know everything. I mean everything about our family. And I had only met 2 of the 12 previously. And so everybody was trying to figure out who's related to, how are we related, and who's a cousin, and who's this and that and everything. And my second cousin's wife, who really is into the genealogy, says, "Don't worry about it. We're just all descendants of Robert Kilgass, and that's really all that matters. And last year, when I was traveling to Arizona, I had an opportunity to stay overnight in my cousin's household, and Ginger, who is the researcher, in her office, this much space of binders on family ancestry.
Hi, my name is Richie McDonald, and thank you, Walt. That was really a fun presentation. When you were presenting your talk and you talked about some women living in a house that was built over, it was presumed that a peddler had died there.
Murdered.
Well, I was just sitting there behaving myself, and you read that, and the hair on my arm stood up. And I got goosebumps, and I thought, oh, thank you.
Janine Silsby, I have a question. I lost track a little bit. Was there a connection between spiritualism and universalism? Was there something about that you...
The Universalists seem to have embraced it more than any of the other denominations. And Janine has a closing song before our parting words.
This, speaking of oral tradition and bringing, many of you know this, and so please join in. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you gotta sing. Oh Lord, you gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you gotta dance. Oh Lord, you gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do when the Spirit says do.
Thank you, Janine. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please join us for a coffee and conversation. Thank you.